Hey guys, welcome back to Home Theater Gurus. So lately we've been talking about tactile transducers, attaching something that actually makes your seats vibrate, kind of add another dimension to our movie watching or gaming, whatever we're doing. So I've had the Crowson motion actuators now for a few months that they've been installed. So in this video we're going to talk about my feelings on those and the performance to price ratio. Now before we get into it, I do want to say I purchased these. These were not just given to me. I did get them at a reduced cost, but I still paid a very pretty penny. So this is not sponsored by Crowson in any way, because not everything that we're going to say in this video is going to be, you know, just pro Crowson. Even though I do recommend these to my room design clients, there's things we have to look at, and you know, is it going to be worth it, you know, because they're expensive, they're not cheap, and there's several options that are much cheaper. So we're going to look at, you know, is the extra cost worth it to you? Okay, so first we're going to take care of the review. I'll tell you what I think about them, and then after that we're going to get into the installation, how I install them. And really with home theater seats, I've had several different brands. They're all kind of the same, have the same issue when it comes to this type of motion actuator. Or versus a standard tactile transducer that kind of shakes the whole seat, like you can mount it to the butt of the seat. And these you have to mount it to the bottom, and there's some complications that come with that. Not anything we can't handle. So I'm going to show you how I did it, and this will work across many different manufacturers. From Valencia, Seatcraft, HT Market. I've had Berklines, which I think Berkline went out of business. But anyway, there's several different manufacturers that all use a very similar mechanism. And those mechanisms have different connection points to the floor where you're supporting the seat. And so like the seat frame, or you know, that's actually supporting your weight is secured to the floor, but then so are the arms. There's more connection points, little rubber feet on the bottom. So that way when you push down on the arms, you know, they're also supported. So we had to make sure that when we're installing this system, you know, it's not so easy like the ones where you can just mount it to the back of the, you know, the seat butt and you're done. We have a lot to think about. So of course, while we're talking about pros and cons, that's going to be a biggie because they're not so easy to install. I mean, it's a weekend project, or I say a one-day project, half a day. It's not a big deal. We just have to approach it differently. But we're going to get into that in a little while when you can actually watch me and see how I did it. So performance-wise, they're really good. They extend down to supposedly, I think 5 hertz or something like that. They extend very low. And of course, this is great because subwoofers really struggle going that low, and it takes an enormous amount of power to have really good output, you know, really under 15 hertz or 20 hertz. I mean, to have something tactile attached to your seat that can take care of that solves a lot of problems. You know, we don't have to have as many subs. We're not eating our subs using all their performance or eating a lot of their headroom up, trying to push them really low. When we attempt to push subs below 20 hertz, you know, 15 hertz, especially down around 10, you get an enormous amount of room distortion. You're chasing rattles, especially if you're trying to get reference levels. I mean, it just becomes insane, the amount of pressure in the room. It beats the room up. It can actually hurt your ears. I mean, that's just a lot of pressure on the human body, you know, as well. Some people may not care about that, but for some people it takes them out of the movie. And that's where, you know, the tactile transducers, they're amazing for that. Now these extend so low that it is a huge plus. Some of the other ones may only extend to 20 hertz, 15 hertz. Now when I say extend, I mean they have a lot of output down low. I mean, there's some of them that if they can feel a little bump at 15 hertz or 10 hertz, they're gonna claim output down to 10 hertz. We're not talking about that. These have authority down really low. So that is definitely a huge pro on their side. Now some people like to put near field subs and things like that, which they're a lot of fun as well, but you do have to keep in mind that you're adding modal sources. Even with the floating platforms where they take the sub drivers and attach them like into that platform and have bicycle inner tubes so it kind of floats. They were once called the Boss hover platform or something like that, but the name's been changed to reflect the guy that designed it. But anyway, nonetheless, you do have to remember those are acoustic devices. They produce sound as well. So if you've got your room all laid out perfectly with your subs placed where we have a nice seat-to-seat consistency, if you just go in there and throw new sources of bass in the room where you have this modal or this acoustic energy in the modal region, you can mess up your seat-to-seat response. So yes, it may become very tactile, but you could hurt the overall sub performance, you know, as a whole. Of course, with tactile transducers, all of the energy is mechanical. So we get the feel of the shaking of our seats, or like when there's a kick, we actually feel it. We get that without having to crank the subs to levels that would pressurize the room, for one thing, and we're not adding sources of bass, you know, trying to put near field subs or anything like that that could hurt our, you know, the performance of the bass overall. Now, of course, in my room designs, you know, I've got the subs perfectly placed and I've got the seats, you know, right where I want them, because we're trying to get a good seat to seat response. So I don't really, or actually I never recommend adding near field subs or adding anything under the seats, anything that's acoustic devices like, you know, subwoofers or anything like that, because I don't want to mess up that response that we've got and you know, the overall performance of the subwoofer system. So I do recommend tactile transducers of any type. All right, so let's talk about how these compare to some of the cheaper ones that I've personally had. I'm not going to talk about, you know, something I haven't had, so we're not even going to worry about different brands out there, except for the ones that I personally have had a lot of experience with, and that is the Aurora. I'm not sure what model they were. It's been years ago, but then more recently the Dayton BST1. I think they have a BST2 now or something like that, like a little bit upgraded model. As far as output goes, I would go as far as to say the Daytons, the little cheap ones, probably had more output, like they could get silly. Now this is, I had 6 Daytons on a Bash 500 watt plate amp. So that's what I was using to push those. And of course, here we have the level 3 motion system with 4 shadow actuators from Crowson with their 501 amp. So it's with their amplifier pushing it. The Daytons had a good bit more output. Now, both of these can get past silly. So that's not really a bad thing, saying that the Dayton system had more output than this Crowson system. You know, it's not a bad thing. You have to remember the Crowson is trying to lift the whole seat. The Daytons, I had those on the butt of the seat, just energizing basically the seat that you're sitting on, the butt part of that chair, which kind of floats on the mechanism. You know, it's not having to fight the whole structure of the chair. And then again, your back and your foot, they're all attached to that butt as well. So you get a very even tactile response that way, you know, with any of your standard tactile transducers mounted to the butt of that seat, because your back and your feet, the whole body is kind of on that platform or attached to the butt platform. So from an energy perspective, it, you know, if you think about it, it most likely takes a lot less energy to shake that butt platform that's floating in that chair mechanism versus trying to lift the whole seat. But I can't really ding the Crowson for that, because both of them, they're easily able to go to silly levels. The Crowsons, I had them dialed back some, you know, but of course the Daytons, I had to dial back even more. And I've heard some people say, you know, well, the Crowsons are faster. I didn't find that at all. I found them to be just as quick as the cheaper, you know, options. I mean, it's just the cheaper options are just basically a subwoofer motor. I mean, it gets the signal, you know, the voltage to move that magnet. I mean, it should happen very quick, and it does. Never had any problems there. So they're just as quick and tight, which is, you know, that's not a bad thing. The cheaper ones work very, very well. And I also felt it was a similar feel, even though, you know, in one method we're lifting the seats and the other one we are vibrating the entire, you know, seat and the headrest. I mean, it's potato patata to me. I'm not going to say that one was better than the other in any way. With the Crowsons, we basically had to build a platform, so we're moving the entire seats. It is an awesome experience, but so are the cheaper models. So right now you're probably thinking, why should I spend this kind of money? Well, there's a reason, and the reason is extension. These extend so low, and it is quite a big of a difference. You know, if we're coming from something like the Daytons and the cheaper option where maybe they roll off at, you know, 20, 15 hertz, are starting to taper down. These Crowsons have a lot lower extension, and it's very noticeable. I had Wayne Pomposa down before CEDIA. He went to CEDIA. He actually came to the US to go to CEDIA, spent a few days at my house, and he's got some tactile transducers in his showroom. He's a dealer, but also a designer and a real good friend of mine. And he had a lot of scenes that he had, you know, he listens in he's in his demo room all the time. So he had a lot of scenes that he listens to in his own room, but also when he's out there tuning rooms in the wild. You know, he's got a lot of known scenes. So we listened to those scenes because I wanted him to compare what he was used to listening to. And he did notice, like in Ready Player One, you know, the race scene, you know, on the bridge and all that. He noticed that where his would stop, these kept going. Like the ground would continue to rumble much, much longer. And his tactile transducers just weren't producing that feel. And he was pretty blown away. And to the point where he was actually going to try to find Randolph, who runs the Crowson division in the US. I don't know if he owns the company or what, or just sells for them. But he was going to try to find Randolph and get information so he could get a hold of these in the Philippines where he lives. But again, you're paying a lot for that extra extension, but to say it's not worth it, I mean, that's going to be person to person. For some people, they may just want, maybe they don't want to crank their subs up to loud levels. They want to feel that kick. They want to feel it at all levels. They don't want to have to crank the pressure of the subs up enough to get the whole seats to shake, which can take an extreme amount of output for that to happen. They want it at all levels, and they want to control how much feel and tactility they get. Is tactility a word? But you know, that's where the tactile transducers come in. These just extend so low that for a lot of people, it's going to be worth that extra price that you're paying. Of course, I got the level 3, which the level 3 has 4 actuators. It has for the sorbethane little feet that go like on the front or anywhere, you know, to help support the seat, but it has to float because we're moving the whole seat. All the connection points to the ground must float. So I got a bunch of extra sorbethane because I knew I was going to have a lot more connection points than just what was provided with that kit. So I think I got another 12. So I had like 16 sorbethane of the little feet. And of course, it comes with the 501 amp. In the instructions for the 501, they show it, you know, you can run 2 of the actuators, you can run 4. They do not show more than 4. Now, I did try to run all 4 of mine off of 1 channel because I only had 1 run of wire going to behind my seats. Because when I would do like the Daytons or something, I was going to wire them in such a way that I would only need 1 channel. But with these, trying to run all of them off of 1 channel off of this amp, it did not have enough power. So the amp is not really a high-powered amp, so it's not going to give you the power like you know, some of the pro amps out there. But I did end up running extra wire through my riser because I needed more output, and I really wanted to see what they would do, you know, giving them the best output they had. So I ran the extra wire and then put 2 on each side, and that really woke them up, and they had, you know, great performance, and so all is well. But I would not run more than 4 off of these amps, 2 per channel. So, I mean, it is a nice amp. The price on the amp isn't crazy. See, the amp's $835, so I mean, it's not a cheap amp by any means, but it does fantastic with 4 actuators on it. It's got a little remote with it, which I never used the remote, but it comes a little rackier, so it's mounted in my rack, and you can easily go up there and turn the dial or use the remote. It's line of sight, just a little infrared remote. So you can adjust your output kind of on the fly. So as far as features on the amp go, it's pretty much like a sub amp. It's got your high pass or your low pass filter, which is basically how high the transducers or the actuator is going to extend. We don't really want them extending too high because you're going to get rumbling in your vocals, and of course we don't want that. So I set mine for about 50 hertz. Now you can play around with this, but all of those settings are on the back, you know, for that. It'd be kind of nice if they were on the front, so while you're tuning them, you'd have your adjustments were a little easier to get to, but they're on the back, and once you get them set and you're happy with it, you're not going to need those settings. You know, you're not going to be tweaking them anymore. It also has a phase switch, 0 to 180. Now, output or power-wise, it is spec'd at 500 watts RMS at 2 ohms. Of course, to be rated at 2 ohms, I mean, that's how they're getting that power. So, I mean, if you look at 4 ohms, it's only 250 watts. I mean, this is not really a really powerful amp, which of course is why I found that when I try to run more than 2 per channel, it did not do well. But again, running 4, it did fine. That's obviously the most that the manufacturer ever planned you using on this amp. One thing I was kind of disappointed in was it had no balanced input. I run a mini DSP, actually the Flex balanced version of the mini DSP. So everything in my system is balanced. I mean, not because it needs to be, there's such short runs, I really don't need it, but I mean, it's one of those why not things. But because of this, I had to use a volume to come out of my mini DSP, as a balanced output out of the mini DSP and convert it to an unbalanced into the amplifier. So I did that just so I could play around with it. For 20 years that I've had tactile transducers, I need to show you guys the one I made a long time ago. That was, probably 2001, we'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, I've always run mine flat with no EQ and much preferred it that way. I tried a filter that is somewhat popular by some guys. They boost the bottom end, then I really, really did not like it. For me, it took gunshots away and things like that where, that 30 to 50 hertz range where I want to feel that impact. just didn't feel it as much, and the bottom end was just way overpowering. It felt a little fake, so I quickly put it back to flat. And with an Anthem, all you have to do is, you know, because I have mini DSP, I'm only using one output for my sub. So after I've run ARC and everything, I just go and turn output 2 on. So now I've got an output that has no EQ on it, and just ran that straight into the Crowson amplifier. So I used the unbalanced output of my Anthem to feed the unbalanced input of the Crowson. So that's how I got around the fact that I didn't have an XLR or a balanced input on the amplifier. So, I mean, there was a workaround, but it just wasn't ideal, because still would have been nice to be able to, you know, sit there on my couch, use the mini DSP to adjust the output and adjust the filters, you know, that low pass filter, so I can control my upper extension. If I could have done all that from in the mini DSP sitting on my couch, it would have been nice, but you know, it's not a big deal. Just walk behind it back there and adjust it, and then go try it, listen to it, and see what I think. Well, it's a good time to show this little bad boy off. About 22 years ago, maybe 22 years ago, I took a home theater in a box subwoofer, it had a little 10-inch sub, and I converted it into this, which was my very first tactile transducer, and basically tore the cone up, cut the basket, and epoxied a bolt into it right here. We have a steel plate right here that bolts across the frame, and got 2 washers, and that's where I would mount it to my sofa. Once I had this, it was really hard to not have a tactile transducer. This little thing was amazing. I actually used another receiver to push it by feeding the LFE out of one receiver into one of the inputs, and I think it was like the CD input or something like that, and I would turn to that input to power this using that old receiver, and it worked fantastic. But you know, it was kind of ghetto, but I was 20 years old, something like that, so didn't have a lot of money to just blow on stuff, so I had to make the best of what it was. And it was really cool. It was a cool little experiment, and it was awesome. All right, so that pretty much covers the performance of the Crowson actuators and the amplifier. You know, as a combo kit, if it's really important to you to extend down low, I would pick this over subs that extend low all day long, every day. You'll get a better performance from your system overall, much less room distortion, which just pulls you out of the content. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody needs to have these. Some people don't care about room distortion. They want you know, if the family room 2 rooms over is shaking and stuff falling off the walls, they love that. So if that's your thing, there's nothing wrong with that. But you know, for me, especially where I'm trying to design home theaters for people that, you know, they just want to get that theater experience and get what the director intended and have an amazing experience, and seat to seat consistency, you know, the bass is very important, you know, to me to deliver to my clients. So I'm going to give them or recommend something like this. And as for the price goes, it is a pretty penny, but you're paying for the extension. So if you're wanting a natural experience, these are very hard to beat. You're gonna have plenty of output, more output than you're gonna need, so you're probably gonna back them down. But again, the key thing to take away from this whole thing is comparing it to cheaper options. You are paying for the low extension, and that is a lot of fun. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about installing them. Again, the Valencia seats that you're gonna see in the video clips, they're just like many of the other from Seatcraft, from HT Market. The bottoms of them pretty much all the same. So I did try a few different methods. The first one didn't work. The seats kind of wobbled a little too much. Now, some of these ideas I actually got from a friend, a Facebook friend, Mike Franks. So I kind of followed some of the things he did when he installed them, because I mean, this is completely different than some of the other options where you just bolt into the back of the seat and go about your day. So I needed to build pretty much a platform, and I didn't want to raise these seats up any more than they were. So I ended up taking or removing all of the little factory feet off of them. Some of them just unscrew with your hand and they're just threaded in there. I think a couple of them I did have to get like a nut driver, you know, or on my impact and actually unbolt them. Now there were a few that actually bolted into connection points for the bracing. So when I took the feet off, I had to put that bolt back in because I didn't want to leave, you know, any bolts out of the actual framing. Then I put all these in a bag and I put them in one of the arms of the chairs, because if I ever sell these chairs or anything like that, I want to be able to quickly put these back on. They go on quick. It doesn't take long to remove everything. So once everything is removed, you know, we have to pay attention to where these little feet are, because that's where these seats need support. And there's lots of support places where they need support. So we don't want to just support them, you know, here and there and then leave the arms unsupported. You know, if someone puts too much pressure, they could break something. We don't want to do that or stress the seats. So I ended up going with a 1x8 across the entire back. Now, I had a 1x8 on hand. You can go with a 1x6. But I did, in hindsight, I liked having that extra width because we're basically building a little platform. Now, we did have an issue where some of the cabling and the wires were in the way, like they would have got sandwiched between the wood and the frame. So I did have to cut the zip ties and relocate those wires. It's not a big deal. It just takes a couple of minutes for each chair. Now I have a set of 4 with a love configuration, so there's actually no arm in the middle, but if you look how I placed my actuators, I have one at every arm. So the seat all the way to the right, we've got one on the arm, and then the center or the right love, we've got one right there on its arm as well. So that end seat basically has one on each side, each arm, for that guy sitting in the far right seat. And I put one right between the 2 love seats and then one on the next arm. So what this means is the guy that's on the far left, whoever's sitting there, doesn't have an actuator on each arm. They only have one on the right side. I only had 4 actuators. But, so that seat, it's still a really awesome seat to sit in, but it's not quite as tactile as the rest. But again, still an awesome seat. It's not like it just kills the whole experience. It doesn't. Now on the far left, where we don't have an actuator, I put a sorbethane isolator because we have to make sure, again, that these seats float. We're basically building a platform. So then on the front of every chair, like every arm, and then in the center, I actually just took a little block of 3/4 inch wood, the same depth as my, my 1x8 that I had back there. Just took a block of that, mounted a sorbethane isolator to that, and then mounted that to the chair. Just screwed it right into the wood. So that way the front of all of our chairs are basically floating. The back of it is sitting on one long platform. Basically the whole thing is sitting on a platform. I didn't want to put any more connection points to the ground than I had to, because even though the sorbethane is very pliable and they're kind of pricey, but I see why, because they are so pliable, but they don't just squish down like nothing. But they're very, very good at isolating from the floor. Again, we need those seats to shake, because if we had just like a hard rubber, foot on the fronts, we would be fighting that, because that's not going to want to shake. Now you can see here, once I have it installed, the 1x8 is pretty much even with the back of the chair. There's actually a little section where the metal that runs along the back is fastened to the metal that's going like along parallel to the arms. I have the seat slid to where it's just hitting that little metal that runs along the back. And I was going to put a screw into the framing, or like from the framing into the wood, that that 1x8 along the back, but I haven't had to. I'm not getting any type of sliding or anything like that, so I'm not going to worry about it. I could paint this board black if I wanted to, because if you look at it just right, like say I didn't have a riser or this little step up like I do, you would probably see some of the light color of the wood. So in your room, you may want to paint that board black, if you wanted to. All right, now setup. I'm gonna refer you guys to a setup procedure that's actually in the Crowson installation guide. If you go to Crowson's website and look at the actuators and click on the instructions for the actuators, there's a PDF that'll pop up. You go to page 9 and it has usage and calibration. It's actually a really good procedure on how to set these up. And this should work pretty much for any actuator, but it was designed for theirs, but it's just a really good setup procedure. Now, as far as timing goes, I do have a little video that I have where it's just I think a 55 hertz bump, just bump, repetitive bump. So you can hear your subs and feel the actuator, the tactile transducer moving at the same time. And if anything's way off, you're gonna notice it. But honestly, the frequencies are so low. And I talked to Randolph about this too, which, he's very familiar with his system. And you're not going to notice anything. You can't even really adjust it by ear. Now, if you had like a wireless LFE system or a wireless amp where you're adding a lot of extra delay, I could see where that type of setup, you may have some issues with enough delay where it was actually causing a problem. So you can use that video that I'm going to put in there and actually kind of test it. Now, if you actually wanted to make sure it was right, you're trying to take a tactile response and align it to an audible response. So we would have to have something, and they do make something that you can use in REW, but you're trying to get a tactile timing and see exactly when it fires. And so you would have to do something like that. They have some information that you can go on AVS and little device you can build or buy to do such things. But in my opinion, I mean, that would just be something you would do for fun. Even if you had it perfect and had that device, I mean, I don't think you would be able to really tell it different. Your subs are gonna be delayed based on the seating position. They've got DSP added to it, but all that is factored into the delay time. And of course, they're aligned to the loudspeakers. So if you have tactile transducers that have no added DSP, they don't have that delay. There's no time delay needed either, because you're basically sitting on them. So it's not like they're having to travel through space. You know, if your subs are 15 feet away, you're sitting on the tactile transducers, so they shouldn't really need any delay. So it should kind of time align itself, just setting the tactile transducers at 0. If you did have something that was really off, or you could feel it, that little bump video that I'm gonna have, whatever episode this is, like this is 54, you know, episode 54, it's gonna be 54.1, so you can just search it that way. I'll have a link in the description for it as well. Now, when Wayne was down, he had a really great idea, a way that he creates an EQ file for the tactile transducers. So say you had one on a seat and it was creating some resonance, or maybe whatever one you have just isn't linear. So what he does is he'll compare different frequencies and how they feel. So he'll play like 50 hertz, and then he'll play maybe 55 hertz, and then 60 hertz. And let's say 55 hertz is feels a little more powerful than 50. So he'll turn 55 hertz down a few dB and then test it. And then whenever it feels equal, he'll write how many dB he turned it down. So maybe it was 3 dB louder, so 55 needs a 3 dB cut. And then he'll compare 50 and 55, he'll compare that to 60. Maybe 60, you know, needed a little bit of a boost to feel similar to 50 and 55. He's just kind of doing it by the butt feel, I guess you'd call it. Just seeing how it feels in relation to the other frequencies. So it's a really, really good idea when you think about it, because it's a tactile device, and so we're using how it feels to our bodies and creating an EQ file. So he just does that all the way, you know, as low as he can go, or as low as the tactile transducers go. And this will also kind of help you feel the extension, so you know, like 15 hertz, you know, maybe it feels nothing like 20 hertz, you know, and you have to crank it 10 dB. Now, I wouldn't do that because you're going to kill the little tactile transducer, but you can kind of see that extension, and you can tell how far they're extending. Now, I haven't done that in my room. I'm not even running the mini DSP right now. Now, with the Crowsons, because they're very linear by nature and they're not really attached to the seat itself, it's a little bit different because of just the way they work. We really shouldn't have to worry about the seating making them not linear, like resonating. But I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. Wayne was here and he was very impressed with the way they performed, and he does this to his. So, you know, that says a lot about the Crowsons. But if you guys that want to tweak, you know, and create a little file and just try it out, maybe you've got some cheap ones, and the cheaper ones are known to not be, you know, accurate. So even if you're running it with no EQ file, I mean, you may have some little peaks and dips, or some frequencies aren't as linear, don't feel, you know, equal to other frequencies. This will be you know, a good way you can go in there and tweak it and just see what you think. Nothing wrong with playing around and just trying it out. All right, so I'm going to give the Crowson 2 thumbs up. We're paying a lot for that low end extension in a way. I mean, if you think about it, if we wanted that low end extension in subs, we're probably going to pay a lot more. So if you look at it from that perspective, maybe you're getting off cheaper, but we don't have the room distortion. We get tactile energy at all levels. We can control how much tactile energy we're getting. And so personally, I can't think of any negatives beside the price, of course. And again, there's cheaper options out there that claim they extend as low, but do they really have the output or the linear output that low? I mean, that I don't know. Maybe that's something I'll do in the future, like some, you know, the butt kickers got some. I think that they claim 5 hertz extension. Again, I don't know if that's linear. So in my opinion, at this point in time, if you want the best tactile response, you know, from an actuator that I've experienced, I mean, hands down, this is it. On the amplifier, it's perfectly fine for up to 4 actuators. If you're going above that, I would go with something else. You're going to need more of their amps. All right, guys, well, that's going to be it for this one. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know the next videos come out, and I will see y'all for the next one.